Since his abrupt resignation from Mars Hill Church in 2014, Mark Driscoll has claimed he was the victim of a vindictive plot.
I think that we need to get Christianity back into the hands of heterosexual, Bible-believing, church-attending, job-working husbands and fathers. You guys got to go to work. We worship Jesus. He had a job.
Imagine being part of something that promises faith, community, and purpose, but slowly it starts to feel toxic and suffocating and almost cultish. That was Mars Hill Church.
To all of you stay-at-home dads, no one respects you because you are a joke.
And the whole sermon was about how Pamela Anderson's a witch, women in Hollywood are witches and worshiping the devil, and how they prayed hard enough and then their son didn't want to be a boy anymore.
You need to accept the fact that the world hates you. You need to understand that friendship with the world is hostility toward God. Those churches who are riding the fence, those pastors are just chafing their crotch.
The tares, the false teachers, the charlatans and the frauds, the compromisers, like Mark Driscoll calling himself reformed, and then becoming a charismatic when the reformed people threw him out.
The story of Mars Hill and Mark Driscoll is not simply the fall of a celebrity pastor. It's a case study in how a very specific subgroup of American evangelicals are willing to do anything to maintain power. Whatever it takes to build, whatever the cost of growth is, and however damaging staying in power is not their burden to bear or their problem to consider. This is a story about how a charismatic leader, bad theology, and an ounce of social media management skills can create a beast that's nearly impossible to take down. It might look like a revival on the outside, but when you pull back the curtain, you'll see the harm. You'll hear about the abuse whispered about among the congregants, and if you stay long enough, you might even experience it too. Mark Driscoll didn't stop with the downfall of his first church. Instead of being asked to leave permanently or being dethroned, something much more predictable took place. Instead, we witnessed the silent relocation and shuffling and rebranding. What we saw was a continuation of the exact same rhetoric, the exact same abusive structures and culture, and the same kind of damage. Today's story is about Mark Driscoll, but it's also a case study into how churches across America reject accountability in the face of scandal and abuse and mix up things like forgiveness and God's grace with the ability to platform perpetrators. Please keep in mind that all statements made in this video are alleged. Please do not direct this conversation towards Mark Driscoll or any sort of affiliated entities, and keep the discussion productive and in the comments of this documentary. Thank you. I do also want to take a moment to acknowledge my sources here. In all of my videos, I do a lot of research, but in this video, I will be directly quoting from the Roy's Report quite a bit. They do incredible coverage of abuse in churches and religious organizations, and their coverage of this was paramount in making the video. I'll be quoting it throughout, so if you'd like to see the full content that they provided and all of the references, check the links in my video description. When you read Mark Driscoll's bio online, it says, with Pastor Mark, it's all about Jesus. He's a spiritual leader, prolific author, and compelling speaker, but at his core, he is a family man, a husband, a father, and a grandfather. Mark and his wife, Grace, have been married and doing vocational ministry together since 1993, and along with their 5 kids, planted Trinity Church. We'll get to that later. You guys probably know him from Mars Hill. Trinity Church in Scottsdale, Arizona as a family ministry. Ashley also started Real Faith Ministries, which contains a mountain of Bible teaching for men, women, couples, parents, pastors, leaders, Spanish speakers, and more. With a master's degree in theology from Western Seminary, he has spent the better part of his life teaching verse by verse through books of the Bible, contextualizing its timeless truths, and never shying away from challenging, convicting passages that speak to the heart of current cultural dilemmas. This bio makes him sound pretty good, and if this is the first time you're hearing of him, you have a lot to learn, because Mark Driscoll entered the public eye back in the 1990s and early 2000s. He was an instant hit with evangelical Christians. He was charismatic, he was hip, and he just kind of seemed to get it. He wasn't some holier-than-thou father looking down upon you. He was an average guy like your neighbor who wore jeans. Sometimes he swore, sometimes he got angry, and sometimes he made mistakes.
Some of you have already whispered in her ear, I'm sorry, I'll do better, trust me. Let's just move on real quickly. How dare you? Who in the hell do you think you are? Abusing a woman, neglecting a woman, being a coward, a fool, being like your father, Adam. Who do you think you are? You are not God. You are just a man. You're not an impressive man. You're not a responsible man. You're not a noble man. You're not a respectable man. You're not a responsible man in any regard. I don't care how successful you are. In this area, if you are a failure, it clouds all of your dignity. It robs all of your masculinity. There is no excuse for any man who claims the name of Christ to treat a woman in a dishonorable, disrespectful way. Some of you right now, you guys will get all angry. Oh, how dare he yell at me? That's the Holy Spirit telling you it's you.
He was human. He was relatable. He was understandable to an average congregation. It was exactly the culture shift that the evangelical church wanted. And Mark prioritized the church as a brand early on. From the start of the entire operation, it feels clear to me that growth was at the front of his mind, though truly nobody could foresee the massive growth and jaw-dropping amount of visibility that would come in the future.
You cast vision for your mission, and if people don't sign up, you move on. There are people that are going to die in the wilderness, and there are people that are going to take the hill. That's just how it is. Too many guys waste too much time trying to move stiff-necked, stubborn, obstinate people. I am all about blessed subtraction. There is a pile of dead bodies behind the Mars Hill bus, and by God's grace, it'll be a mountain by the time we're done. You either get on the bus or you get run over by the bus. Those are the options. But the bus ain't going to stop.
Mars Hill may have started out in Seattle as a modest congregation, but it didn't stay that way for very long. It ended up becoming a megachurch, the megachurch that we all know of with several different remote locations, satellite locations. It boasted thousands of attendees at its peak. It produced a constant flow of books for sale, and it even hosted conferences. It also launched a media arm which propelled the church and ultimately Mark, who was the face of it all, into celebrity pastorhood and megachurch status. By 2014, Mars Hill was truly the perfect metaphor. It was this alien megachurch up on a hill in sight of everybody, and with all of the visibility, attendance and donations and volunteer numbers only grew. It was all a sign of the times. Polished marketing, uncharacteristic of churches at the time, and unapologetic masculine theology that wasn't afraid to spit in your face just like you were allegedly spitting in God's. As Mars Hill's growth only continued to outpace public expectations, whispering started happening behind the scenes. What was really going on wasn't as innocent, loving, or even as Christian as it would seem.
Mars Hill was complicated. It was a place that faith and fear got tangled up together. It was a place that church abuse ran rampant. It was a place that they would hide behind something called redemption groups or demon trials. I was a part of that. We'll talk a little bit about that. It was a place that you were with the cool kids having beers after church, and you thought, wow, this is what church is. This is cool. But then they would abuse you by mentally messing you up and making you share all of your secrets. The church power was out of control. It got messy really fast.
Former Mars Hill staff and church congregants started sharing and comparing stories and experiences behind the scenes. For those deeply involved in the church or working closely with Mark, they noted aggressive church discipline that went far beyond what was typical in similar church environments.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's what I can remember when I went to that community group that you were in. I was like, I had no idea that Christians were so cool. Like,
yeah. Yeah.
Do
you remember what they would do to me? They would put me in a freaking circle in community group, and I was such an honest soul. So I don't know if you remember any of this, but they would be like, Shannon, did you go out this weekend? Did you drink? Did you have a one-night stand? And I'd be like, yes. They told me, Kara, that I was demonically charged because of this, which if you look at it and you look at like childhood trauma and why you're the way that you are, it is not because you're demonically charged. It is just neuroscience, right? It is certain things that are in your system that maybe you didn't heal from. But they made me do the demon trial. Do you know what that is?
I never did that, but yes, I do know what that is.
They had me sit in a room with 3 men, mind you, and I was in there for like 7 hours. And I had to talk about basically everything that I was ever a victim of and everything I've ever done bad. So anybody that I made a victim. And it was wild.
They also highlighted an internal culture that discouraged any form of dissent. There were questions about who had the power and if too few people held too much of it. These whispers among congregants eventually grew louder among those who had left or whistleblowers who were currently in the church. Public controversies began to pile up over time at a rate that was difficult to deny the credibility of. Finally, in 2013, there were accusations against Mark that he had borrowed or plagiarized other people's work without properly attributing it. For the layperson, we just call this stealing. For professionals, they call it citation errors. Mark did issue a formal apology acknowledging the legitimacy of the concerns. At a minimum, this early crisis started to expose the cracks of a ministry that is built on the celebrity status of its pastor. The reality was, if I were Mark, I'd be relieved that the backlash was about citation errors and not about the darker structures or treatment of the staff.
They say Driscoll is not running a church, he's running a cult. The Driscoll family is treated like royalty with their own private security team. The church, too, is like a compound with cameras and security everywhere. And if you happen to get on the wrong side of Mark Driscoll and his family, you're not only kicked out of the church, but in one case, a family was surveilled 24/7 by investigators hired by the church.
These deeper and much more sinister accusations came from former elders and staff. They described patterns of harsh speech, rage, and a very domineering type of leadership coming from Mark. I'm going to read from the Roy's report. It says, Driscoll resigned from Mars Hill in 2014 after an internal investigation at the church found Driscoll guilty of arrogance, responding to conflict with a quick temper and harsh speech, and leading in a domineering manner. But prior to his resignation, Driscoll had already been accused of plagiarism. His church had also admitted that it had used more than $210,000 of church funds to buy Driscoll's 2013 book, Real Marriage, to put that book at the top of the New York Times bestsellers list. What a great use of congregants' money. The article goes on to say, Driscoll, known by some as the cursing pastor, was also known for degrading talk about women and vulgarity. He once said that women were created to be homes for men's penises and that oral sex was biblical. And in 2016, several former members brought a class action suit against Driscoll, accusing him of running Mars Hill like an organized crime syndicate, systematically soliciting donations for one purpose, but then using them for another. The suit was later dismissed because the plaintiffs did not have the money to pursue the suit. So bear with me, we're still in the 2013-2014 era, but the rising pressure of discontent in the church had reached a critical breaking point. Mark had founded a church planting network called Acts 29, if you're familiar with it, and they made a decision that shocked the public. Acts 29 chose to remove Mark Driscoll and therefore Mars Hill from its membership. They cited allegations of ungodly and disqualifying behavior as their reasoning for removing Mark. It wasn't a crime report or something that got caught on video, but it was validation in a huge way of an issue from a reputable body who certainly would not benefit at all from severing ties with Mark and the megachurch unless they felt like there was a major issue coming down the road or future controversies that would be associated with Mark or Mars Hill. In an elders investigation at Mars Hill, which was apparently very thorough, they concluded that Driscoll had been guilty of, again, arrogance, harsh speech, and this domineering manner. They didn't find that he behaved in a way that broke any laws or they said immorally, but I would say that using harsh speech or behaving in a domineering manner is unethical. But even the language that they had chosen to use in the report was enough to be seemingly the last nail in the coffin for a celebrity pastor. It didn't take long before Driscoll resigned as Mars Hill's pastor and the entire megachurch network dissolved into a puff of smoke. It left the public a little bit confused. There were a lot of lingering questions. Was this a pastor who sometimes lost his temper and was now being torn down by scorned staff who hadn't liked feeling convicted or maybe being held accountable? Was it some takedown scheme by another megachurch or maybe people even in his own church who wanted to lead? Was this yet another example of the Christian church being persecuted in America? Or were the negative reports all legitimate as they seem to be? And if so, did the response from other organizations or those close to Mark and the church indicate that things actually might be worse than the public even knew about? Had laws been broken? Did his temper ever cross the line into abuse? Were there things that were being covered up? Did we have the full picture, or was he just kind of a bad leader? People had questions and people talked. Critics came out and publicly made allegations that funds had been used in these inappropriate ways. I'm going to go back to this example again, that the church's money was oftentimes spent on Mark's books. And again, there's that large amount of money, the $210,000 that they spent trying to get Mark's book onto the bestseller list. This feels dishonest to me, and it's certainly not what people are donating their money to the church for. But we didn't have to wait long before the lawsuits and the more public complaints followed. In public perception, it became clear that the system within Mars Hill was corrupt, and checks in the organization were either non-existent or had failed entirely. I'm going to read an article quickly to you from the Christian Century. This is a portion of it. It says, Seattle megachurch pastor Mark Driscoll has been removed from a church planting network of more than 500 churches he helped found after a pattern of ungodly and disqualifying behavior. Driscoll, co-founder of the Acts 29 network, has been an influential but edgy pastor within his conservative evangelical circles for several years. His own Mars Hill Church attracts some 14,000 people at 15 locations across 5 states each Sunday. At the same time, however, Driscoll has been controversial in evangelical circles for years. The New York Times Magazine called him one of the most admired and reviled figures among evangelicals nationwide. Just sit on that for a second, how big of a statement is. One of the most admired and reviled figures. That really does show just how much public perception of him was changing. There's a quote, if I continue on in the article. It says, over the past 3 years, the board has been the recipient of countless shots, dozens of fires directly linked to you in what we consider ungodly and disqualifying behavior, the board wrote. This is from Acts 29. We have both publicly and internally tried to support you and give you the benefit of the doubt, even when multiple pastors in our network confirmed this behavior. Eventually, He stepped down from Mars Hill entirely. He wasn't a pastor there anymore. And many onlookers thought this was the end, at least for us. We thought that we wouldn't hear about Mars Hill or see Mark Driscoll's face again, but we couldn't have been more wrong. In 2016, he resurfaced and announced that his great return was going to be bigger and better than ever.
A church minister to accused plagiarizer and misogynist. Tonight, a controversial author and Seattle pastor hoping the Valley will become home to his newest venture. ABC 15's Nick Van Zandt is following the story. And Nick, Mark Driscoll not making any mention of his controversial past with his old church.
No, only thing that he is saying is that he wants to have a new start here in the Valley, but we talked with critics who say that he has so much controversy following him, he shouldn't just get a new start.
We have a big announcement, at least it's big for us.
In a 5-minute long video posted to his website, Pastor Mark Driscoll talks at length about his new church.
We love you, we're here, we're glad to be here. We brought the 5 kids, the dog, a Bible, and a lot of hopes and dreams.
But he never mentions his old one, Mars Hill, a megachurch. Critics say he left after several controversies.
There were a lot of problems with members. Members felt hurt in one way or the other.
Psychology professor Warren Throckmorton says Driscoll's fiery sermons grew Mars Hill from a small gathering in his living room to a congregation nearly 15,000 strong. But then in 2014, protests started after accusations that Driscoll used church funds to promote his book, bullied church employees, and once wrote a blog post saying that women should stay in their place.
He does need to be above reproach. It's not okay for him to be abusive.
Where Driscoll plans to start his church is a mystery. The only address on his new website matches up with this UPS store in North Scottsdale, and in his video, Driscoll himself doesn't seem to know.
Some of you will have questions. Where are you going to meet? I don't know. When are you going to start? I don't know. We got a lot of work to do.
Now, on his website, Driscoll lists several prominent religious leaders here in the Valley who he says are supporting his new church. We tried several times to get a hold of Driscoll, but he has not yet returned any of our requests.
In 2014, Pastor Mark Driscoll abruptly resigned from Mars Hill Church after an investigation found him guilty of arrogance and a pattern of abusive leadership. Then Driscoll moved south to Arizona to start another church.
Now, instead of Mars Hill Church, Mark Driscoll had founded the Trinity Church in Scottsdale, Arizona. Of course, not ever one to just sit back and allow someone else to get the limelight. He was going to be the head pastor of this church. He had a brand new congregation to preach to and new branding to recruit congregants, donors, and staff under. Ex-evangelicals couldn't have groaned more loudly and collectively than when this news hit the internet. It is once again the same tired pattern. An abuser in leadership in the church is exposed, moved quietly somewhere else, and then given the backing to restart and commit the same atrocities under new names. Of course, not everybody was brand new. Some of his old church members did follow him to help him get this new start and to support him. And who knows if we'll ever get the entire truth, but what we do know is that there is a pattern here that isn't just specific to Mars Hill. This type of abuse happens often and quietly. Those of us asking for accountability and answers didn't go away. In later years, elders and former leaders started to publicly express ongoing concerns, saying that there were clear patterns of abuse. There are a few examples I can pull from that give you a clear example into what was allegedly going on and why people are concerned that Mark is still operating today. One of the best examples, in my opinion, is someone who heard of Mars Hill before ever walking in the doors, sitting in the pews, or donating to them. This person is someone that you've likely heard of if you are familiar with the deep history behind Mark Driscoll. This person is a woman named Jolie Monea. According to Jolie, she'd apparently heard about Mars Hill before ever attending. Its reputation at this point preceded it. She had heard the negativity for herself. She knew that he was into gender roles and could get a little bit aggressive from the pulpit, but she would never imagine how close she'd truly get to the Driscoll family. Her family started out by getting involved with Mars Hill, and they loved it. When Mark resigned from Mars Hill, her and her husband discussed it and made the very difficult choice to relocate their family to Arizona in order to attend Trinity Church. The cracks started to form when Jolie started to teach a women's study. She says that she refused to give Grace Driscoll, Mark Driscoll's wife, her lessons in advance for approval. The entire mood changed and they really didn't want her around anymore. Imagine that. Moving from Seattle to Arizona and then rejection. But they stuck it out because their daughter was engaged to Mark's son, Zach. The curtain had been pulled back, but too late. Her own daughter was about to become a Driscoll. And then in 2020, Jolie saw an interview with two previous Mars Hill leaders. These were friends of theirs. These were people that they had previously known and trusted. And they had spoken publicly about their experiences, negative ones, and the abusive leadership. The problem was undeniable at that point. Jolie alleges that as time passed on, her daughter's personality changed. She started deferring more to her husband, Zach Driscoll, and eventually they even decided to leave the church, and soon after, their relationship with their own daughter disappeared too. It's genuinely a heartbreaking story. Jolie Monea has shared publicly that she dealt with a culture that prized loyalty above all else, including the truth. And for her daughter, loyalty to the Driscoll name was her most important role in her new life. For those of you who have ever existed in an abusive environment, it's typical to find that the abuser provides frequent testing of your loyalty and opportunities for you to prove yourself or to be rebuked for failing. Chloe's test came soon enough when Jolie, her mother, maintained contact with someone who had been asked to leave Mark's Trinity Church and when they decided to leave. That was allegedly enough for her own daughter and son-in-law to ultimately cut off contact with her and the rest of the entire family. This is shocking coming from a family of God, a man of the Lord who should be promoting Christian ideals like togetherness and forgiveness and reconciliation and love without expectation, not for himself and for his wrongdoings, but for others. According to the reporting by the Roy's Report, this is not an isolated pattern. Other parents of Trinity Church staff members and Driscoll's in-laws have reportedly been labeled as toxic, discouraged from contacting their family, or just being relationally cut off from their own offspring.
Share the truth. But when you bring something up before Mark Driscoll or the Trinity Church, you're kicked out, as we see happen with this individual here. And this isn't an isolated incident. This happened to several people. I mean, their official trespass list through Scottsdale PD is lengthy, I guarantee you. So knowing that they kick people out of church and then they start slandering them. This person's toxic, they're demonic, they're liars. Everything that they're saying is false. I mean, even to this day, Pastor Darian Bennett, who leads the men's ministry, is telling people everything on Dare Driscoll's false. It's all fabricated. It's all lies.
This just goes to show you the control that they might truly have over certain staff or congregants. Trinity Church, Mark Driscoll's new church, has faced many accusations of mirroring cult-like behavior or the behavior that is like what you would see in a high-control religious group.
According to Mark Driscoll, the Trinity Church in Scottsdale, Arizona is all about Jesus, but insiders say that's not true. It's all about Mark and control and money.
It shouldn't be a surprise when I tell you that recent history at Trinity Church involves allegations of similar issues and questions about how they ensure accountability within their church's leadership structure. The Roy's Report, which once again, thank you, because that is where I got so much of this information from, received a leaked recording of a private conversation in which Mark Driscoll made the claim that the church had local elders. The implication of this is that there was some degree of an accountability structure at this new church. It implied that it wasn't just Mark making these decisions and avoid this time, acting as the mouthpiece of God unchecked. Unfortunately, in the recording, he also refused to identify any of these elders. Of course, this was all done for their protection. Mark didn't want his drama to impact the lives of the church elders. That obviously raised significant concerns that these church elders don't actually exist, or that the people he's referring to as church elders are actually church staff or people that are consulting with the church who are not actually given a real opportunity to question authority or to correct him in a meaningful way. Public filings only add to the list of legitimate questions. In Trinity's 2020 annual report with the state of Arizona, only 3 men other than Driscoll are even named, and every single one of them do not live in Arizona. Can remote staff hold you accountable for your in-person behavior? Can they be considered at a minimum a local elder? More troubling were Driscoll's own recent attempts to recast the narrative of his Mars Hill departure.
Some years ago, we were in a season where massive media firestorm, lots of conflict and controversy. Said, okay, investigate everything. I know I'm not disqualified. I know who I am. I can't wait to stand before Jesus. It's going to be a great day for me. Not that I'm perfect, but I know who I am, and I know who he is. And we were asked to return, and I'll share something with you I've never shared. I don't know if it's a good idea or not. I'll ask Grace. She did this. So okay. I was in one end of the house. Grace was in the other. God spoke to us both. Said, "You're released. You need to resign immediately." And God told me a trap is set. He didn't tell Grace that. So she came in. She's like, "God just spoke to me." I was like, "God just spoke to me." And I said, "What did you hear?" She said, "We're released." I said, "I heard we're released," and that trap was set. So we walked away, didn't defend ourselves. Took 18 months, didn't do social media, didn't do public ministry. Just wanted to heal up and be with my family and get them into safety in a very dangerous season of our life. And so during that time, I met with some of my critics and enemies, one-on-one or small group, people that had been friends, people who claimed to be Christians, some who were pastors, some who still are pastors. And I asked them, I said, God told me a trap was set. So I asked him, I said, do you know what that might be? And these people that we had known said, yeah, the nuclear option was we were going to accuse you of adultery. This was at Panera, multiple meetings at Panera. It's like, you guys discussed accusing me of adultery. I was like, you know that's not true. I've been faithful to my wife my whole life. I adore my wife. I love my wife, and she loves me. We've been faithful to each other. We've been open our whole marriage about any struggles we have had because we know that every married couple has some hardship to go through, and we have never been dishonest, but we have never done that. We've never done anything remotely like that. They said, yeah, that's why we kept it as the nuclear option. I was like, to get me what? They said, to get you out of the pulpit. They said, because we knew that if we accused you of adultery and enough of us signed the open letter, that ultimately there would be such a media firestorm that you would have to exit ministry, exit preaching God's word for probably a year while a full investigation was done. During that time, we could take over and lead and be in charge. And then we figured one of two things would happen. Either you would come back, but we would be in charge, or you would never come back, and you'd be done forever. I came home, I told Grace, I was like, oh my gosh. Multiple people told me that to my face on separate occasions and days.
In a sermon at Trinity, he claimed that former church leaders had plotted to falsely accuse him of adultery in order to get him out of the pulpit, essentially. According to Driscoll, the accusation was meant to bring on a huge media scandal that would wreck him forever, or would at least force him into a hiatus or into a structure where these other people that were trying to ruin his life, that they would then be in control. I'm going to read from a quick list of other allegations. This is coming again, directly from the Roy's report. The first one is that Trinity kicked a security team member out of his role and off the church campus after the church member reported serious concerns about a staff member's actions with a child.
You know, we had a former security member bring forth concerns that a staff member was having inappropriate relationships with and around children, you know, and I'll just leave it at that. And people twisted that and changed the topic and changed the narrative. But the biggest concern is that when this individual brought forward his concerns and his wife's concerns, within an hour, the decision was made to kick him and his whole family out of the church. That was the question I have. Why would you immediately go to kicking someone out? Why immediately kick someone out? And then when an individual types an incident report, which was Mark Sturton, who is Driscoll's personal family security lead, he writes an incident report and emails it to me. Ben and I had both just created official formats of incident reports. And I'd asked Brandon, hey, you want me to transpose this information that this individual sent to my Gmail to the official format? And his response was, no, absolutely not. I want nothing in writing. You need to delete it. I want no evidence of it. Anything in writing with their names, absolutely not.
This person said, when we requested access to the video cameras to properly document the staff member's innocence, I was ignored. Luckily, Driscoll's security team followed protocol and created an incident report with the staff member's name redacted. When I asked Pastor Brandon how to handle this report, he instructed me to delete everything. Then they say the church staff walks on eggshells. They're afraid to make any decision that might upset Driscoll, and after Driscoll blew up at one of the pastors, he repeatedly shouted the F word at him, and Driscoll then mandated that all staff attend a threat assessment 2 days later, otherwise they would lose their jobs. To meet this demand, one staffer ended up having to actually cancel his own child's birthday party, and others had to cancel vacations, and another actually had to cancel marriage counseling. All things that you'd think a pastor would want you to attend.
This gentleman rushes the stage, and I was kind of looking over my shoulder to the left, and he came from the right. And so as soon as that happened, I jumped up on stage just to kind of protect Mark and make sure that nothing bad happened. And it was clear that the man was inebriated. He was just asking for prayer. He wasn't threatening in his demeanor and his language, and he wanted somebody to pray for him, which I think is a good thing in a church. Maybe poor timing, but it wasn't anything hostile or threatening. And so we escorted him off the stage, went out front with him. We called the police. But after that, everything kind of spiraled. Security got ramped way up.
Wasn't one of the things that one of the leaders of the church communicated to you is that Mark was upset that nobody drew their weapon on this guy? Is that true?
He goes, well, you know, Pastor Mark's really upset with me. Why is he upset with you? Well, he's mad because I didn't draw my weapon. He said I didn't pull my gun, and I put him and his family in danger. And I should have drawn my weapon, and I didn't. I kind of froze in the moment. And I said, whoa, hold on. Pastor Mark Driscoll told you that you should have drawn your weapon on that guy. And he said, yeah. And he goes, I probably should have. You know, if this happens again, next time I won't hesitate. I said, John, just stop. Like, I don't care what Mark told you. He's wrong.
Then Trinity Church tried to kick out a father because his son had kissed Mark Driscoll's daughter.
A family that got kicked out because his son kissed one of Mark Driscoll's daughters. Again, they were teenagers and they liked each other. He kissed her and he got kicked out. But anyway, yeah, so he was asking about that incident.
According to Brandon Anderson, she kissed him.
Oh, that's interesting.
I'm just saying, that's what he told me right before I quickly pointed out to him that my last name was Ennius. And since it wasn't Driscoll or Manueli, I didn't really need to know any of the details, which he proceeded to tell me more details after the service anyway, but that's just how they kind of do it. They kind of slip in and tell you a little bit of a detail to earn your trust so you can actually spread the rumors.
Yeah, the conversation that Randall was having with me at the Easter weekend service was about the Angelo Manueli incident. And he asked me, he said, you know, have you been able to get much information on him? I know you guys have a private investigator. You have this team pulling that. And he said, I've read a lot of the police reports about his previous interaction with his neighbor. They're basically trying to get anything they can against Angelo at this point. And I said, well, Brandon's handling that. I don't know what all information he's gotten, and whatever I've gotten, I've just funneled it up to him. Other than that, no. And I could tell that Randall was kind of fishing, but then he changed the subject a little bit. He had just finished talking about his son. Then he starts telling me about his daughter. He goes, well, my daughter, she's in her last year of law school. She's about to be an attorney. And I just spent 3 days with her last weekend. And she has access to these different systems and platforms. And he goes, you may have heard of them. She let me use her login, and I was able to dig up a lot of stuff on Angelo. And it's, oh, really? Like, without a warrant? Like, how are you accessing these systems? Oh, well, again, it's my daughter's account. It's her login. Like, she's in her last year of law school. So I just used her stuff. And me being a cybersecurity guy, I was like, okay, first of all, it's illegal. You can't be using other people's accounts, especially that you don't have access to. Identity and access management is huge in the security world. And for her letting you use her account to access information about someone the church kicked out, like this, let's talk about ethics. Like, put the legal part aside. What about some morals and ethics? Like, why are you acting this way? And you're one of the leaders or directors or overseers of our church, or wise counsel. Like, what kind of wise counsel are you providing Mark Driscoll? Like, what you're doing is not right.
He was a 15-year-old son, and Driscoll apparently called the father demonic and called him vulgar names and had him tailed by a private investigator.
Here's a story that should be on TikTok. I was kicked out of Mark Driscoll's church, the Trinity Church, for kissing his daughter, who I was dating. Yes, you heard that right. So a couple years ago, I was working at the Trinity Church. Mark Driscoll was basically my head boss. I was working alongside a few of his kids, including his daughter, who was 17. We started talking. Eventually, Mark called me into a meeting in his office with his wife, Grace, where we talked for a while. This is one of many meetings. He basically outlined some rules, and we went from there. Now, obviously, us being teenagers, me being 15, we kissed. Eventually, somehow, still don't know how, this information got back to Mark. I was taken into an office by one of his staff members, Brandon Anderson, where I was berated and yelled at until I was told that I was being kicked out of the church for kissing his daughter. He told me to grab my stuff and leave. There's so much more to the story, but it's all over the news. You can look up the articles. I have podcasts that you can go watch on my YouTube channel. Nonetheless, we were kicked out. Mark Driscoll sent me an email the following day, told me not to attempt any more communication. I would not be allowed to talk to her, and I would not be allowed to return to the church. We were served trespass warnings. He hired 24/7 surveillance to watch my family to make sure we didn't come back to the church. All this stuff sounds so crazy, but it's 100% true. So I wasn't going to respond to this video, but these comments are just so hilarious. I'm reading these with my wife, and I'm just dying laughing. First of all, it seems like 90% of the people commenting can't listen to a video and pay attention, because never once did I ever say that there was any kissing or anything inside the church. None of this happened inside the church. And everyone wants to talk about, oh, a father protecting a daughter. You know how many hundreds of texts that I can release between me and her where she told me about the constant abuse that Driscoll put her and her siblings through? And you can say, oh, well, that's fake, whatever. It's always fake until someone releases proof. Everyone's say, oh, it's fake until I show them pictures. It's fake until they see screenshots. There was times where I was on FaceTime and she hung up right away because he was in the house screaming about something, slamming doors, punching walls, and she had to leave all of a sudden because she didn't want me to see that side of her dad, which I saw anyways, aside from him just being abusive to her, also with his staff members and everyone that worked at his church. Anyone that can still defend this guy with his track record are just cult members. I mean, he was kicked out of Mars Hill in Seattle, then he moved to Scottsdale, and the same stuff is happening here, and people just say, no, it's just evil spirits attacking him. It's evil spirit. It's not Driscoll. He didn't do anything wrong. It's the same logic as saying that a career criminal didn't commit a crime that he just got arrested for, and they're just alleging that he did it, and they're people lying. Mark has a record of doing crap like this.
Apparently, Driscoll also threatened to bankrupt the father and bleed him dry in court using a church litigation fund whose balance had been tripled to $10 million.
10, 11 million set aside. We're going to bankrupt people and bleed them dry in court. if anyone ever crosses me. He said, Chad, it's just a numbers game. I guarantee you people run out of money before we do. And I knew, and I knew he had made those threats and sent cease and desist letters and who knows what other legal threats from his Mars Hill days. So
next, they say church staffers use campus surveillance tech to spy on congregants and those working or volunteering and rated people on a sliding loyalty scale.
But then he tells us that he goes, and just so you guys know, your actions and behaviors online on social media are being heavily monitored. Trinity has hired a team to monitor your social media posts, to monitor who you're connected with, who you're friends with, what type of stuff you're liking and commenting and sharing. Because there were issues, like people were sharing pictures of being with people that are now deemed as outcasts. They're toxic or demonic, people that have left the church or been kicked out of the church, even former paid members that were fired. He says, so Chad, just so you know, Caleb and I just sat through a couple-hour session with Pastor Mark and the rest of the staff where we talked about trust levels and relationships. And Mark briefed the staff on what is called the spectrum of trust, from a 0 to a 10. The higher you are on the spectrum, the more access you get. And I said, access to what? He said, the access to the Driscolls. The Driscolls are level 10. So the higher you get on that spectrum, the more trust and more access to the Driscolls that you get. And he says, so Chad, security team is like a level 9. And he's like, your wife may be like a 6. Ben is even lower than you, Chad, because he can't get his wife under control.
They're also allegedly one of the churches during COVID-19 that didn't stop things, and also at some points even allegedly had COVID and still attended events and just didn't tell anyone. So knowingly spread it, allegedly. Finally, they claim that there is just no oversight. When we look at cult dynamics, I always direct us back to the Bite model. It's a model of authoritarian control, and it grades religious group based on the 4 criteria, which are behavior, information, thought, and emotion. I can't definitively label Mark Driscoll or his churches as cults or not, but we can review what we've learned so far through the Bite model. Do we see behavior control within any of the allegations? I would argue yes, and in a range of capacities ranging in severity. We saw it with Jolie Monea being asked to submit her lesson plans to Grace Driscoll for approval, and we see it in her own daughter when she later had to cut contact with her own parents and siblings after marrying into the Driscoll family.
It's all on the heels of, again, you talked about the Manueli incident and surveillance. They hired a private investigator to surveil the Manueli family after they were obviously downgraded to 0 on the spectrum of trust because they got angry that they got kicked out of the church for something so ridiculous as their teenage son kissing the daughter of Driscoll. At that point, Chad, I mean, was that making your head spin at all that, oh my goodness, we're surveilling a family, private individuals who left the church 24/7? And is that even, I guess it's illegal.
Do we see information control in the allegations presented to you? In my opinion, yes. It seems that Trinity Church has gone through great lengths to conceal Mark's past and the reality that he was never forgiven and put back in good standing, so to speak, with his previous denomination. He wasn't cleared to work in ministry again. He never repented. He never changed. He just made the decision to move on. If people think instead that he's a loving pastor who has simply experienced intense spiritual warfare and a public canceling by a soft, feminized, easily offended generation of the church, they will be more likely to forgive him. In many senses, this plays into the idea that if you are doing right, the world will hate you because of your love. For many in the evangelical church, the fact that Mark has undergone such intense public scrutiny and has had to restart is a testament to his dedication to ministry and to the Lord rather than being seen as a red flag. Do we see thought control? I would also argue yes here as well. Creating a culture of silence and fear is a big part of all of this, and we see this exemplified by the whistleblowers who allege that Mark made them sign NDAs, has sent lawsuits for speaking out, and preemptively made threats about financially ruining people on staff.
But it gets worse. My guests say upwards of 100 families have recently left the church, and those who haven't gone quietly are now being threatened with litigation. According to my guest, Driscoll has threatened to sue and bankrupt former members, and he has a litigation fund of approximately $10 million.
Mark shares stories to indicate that he and his family are under attack and are in need of personal family security for their church and to get empathy. In emotion control, what could be more controlling emotionally than intentionally creating sermons to call out and target your family members or your friends who are sitting in the front row of the pews? To claim that it's the voice of God rather than Mark's own direct and manipulative messaging, to me, that is incredibly corrupt.
Mark, if you are listening to this message, that we are calling you to repent. We call on you to publicly repent. We are calling you to publicly repent for refusing to stop the spread of lies. Mark, we are calling you to publicly repent for sowing disunity in the body of Christ. Mark, we are calling you to publicly repent for covertly trying to divide brothers and making false and slanderous accusations. Mark, we are calling you to publicly repent for trying to create division, all the while saying you love us.
What I can say clearly is that the patterns are something we cannot ignore, and they are concerning. For me, too many people in way too many different situations have claimed to be hurt by Mark Driscoll or his family or ministries, or have even just had to publicly distance themselves from him and his work. Too many for me to be comfortable with any of it. It's something that I personally can't unsee. Even as somebody that grew up listening to Mark Driscoll's sermons, particularly on spiritual warfare, and loved them. Somebody that was a fan of his, 15 years ago.
I never really saw any of the actions that were taking place behind the scenes until I started serving in a leadership position as the director of the security team. Oftentimes you'll see that concealment, things that are people don't want the public to be aware of, or even their own church congregation, it's concealed. And scripture shows us that is darkness. So
overall, we've done a brief look at Mark Driscoll, even though this took us some time to get through. It seems like we'll be hearing a lot more from Mark Driscoll. He's been commenting on politics a lot more and has even recently done a video talking about how Candace Owens has lost her mind, which I just can't even get into that right now. There's so much wrapped up in both of them. But he's commenting on more of these things. And so I think eventually we will be doing more videos on him and his opinions. And I don't like that he's trying to be a public voice and fill this role. He is doing a lot of podcasting, and it just does disturb me, and it does concern me that he's trying to step back into the public eye. Once again, I do just want to say that all of this is alleged. None of this has been proven in a court of law. I am reading to you guys from what has been written about this. I've compiled information. I've done a lot of research on subreddits and things like that, like forums of people posting experiences, their own personal experiences. But all of that being said, it is alleged. Please don't sue me, Mark Driscoll. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I've been saying in the last few videos this, and so it's probably redundant at this point, but Thanksgiving was, not too long ago, and I have not been feeling well. I deal with some chronic health issues, and I'm trying to get it figured out right now. But it's just been difficult, and I was in the emergency room the other night for pain, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. And none of this is to get sympathy or anything like that. This is really to say, while I'm looking for work, while I am trying to find a job, having this channel as an income, as something to keep me busy, as something to really pour my soul and my heart into, and to keep me afloat while I don't have a job right now, I can't tell you guys how incredible it is. You know, doing a YouTube channel is certainly work, and maybe it is just that I have a lot more fun doing it, so it doesn't feel like work. I put in a lot more hours for this channel than I would for a job, like I put in more than 8 hours a day is what I'm trying to say, which is evidenced by how many videos I put out, hopefully. I put in a lot of work, but it still is easier on me mentally and physically and all of that than working a remote job and having to be on Zoom calls. And, you know, over the last week, I've just done a ton of research and written a lot of scripts and focused on that while I'm sick. I didn't record as much. And so I just want to say that's because of you. That's because of you watching this in a very real way. I know that it's easy to get lost in the numbers and just in how all of this works, but you are directly supporting me by viewing this, and I just want to say thank you, genuinely, for making this possible, for believing in a small channel that only started 7 months ago, 8 months ago, and just all of the love. It really means a lot. I won't be stopping anytime soon. I'm just going to continue to improve, based on your guys' feedback, and yeah, thank you guys so much. I am so grateful. If you guys do want to support me further, you can always become a member to the channel because you will see these videos a little bit earlier. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and drop a comment down below. You can always comment a bird or a dove because that's my logo, and I'll respond back to you with a white heart. Thank you guys so much once again, and I will see you in the next one.
Mark Driscoll, you remember me? Remember all those times in your office? All those talks? That time in your house when you were sitting in your underwear on the couch? Yeah, nothing's off limits in this one, Marky. You want to keep going with your cult? Well, then let's play that way. Here we go. Mark Driscoll, I'm coming back better. Thought you would shut me up with the cease and desist letter? Hiding in your office thinking you haven't been caught. Don't you know, Marky, you can't outsmart God. Where's all the trainers in your family cult club? Had to take them all away just to make it look built up. No elders, 7 years in the valley. Appointing your own pastors cause your family's so badly. From security guard to pastor, Caleb's causing some skepticism. What's he pastoring? A masterclass on narcissism? Does all the money really go straight to Driscoll? Was on someone switch to real estate just to earn an extra nickel? No more ties, is that why your staff is quitting? Guess your sexist sermon really stopped hitting. You preach that the man is the leader of the house. We all know your house is actually ran by Grace, your spouse. You teach a class called Real Men, so you're teaching a class about what you never been. Accepted Grace without a ring, disobeying her father, then you kick someone out your church just because they kissed your daughter. Just to walk the stage, you gotta call your entourage. But those guards won't hide you from God. When something goes wrong, you say the devil's coming through. That's a funny way to say that God's been disciplining you. Come on, Mark, I know about your loose screws. Your own daughter said your family is scared of you. She always said she couldn't wait to get out, but you buy her love with gifts just like you do with your crowds. Bouncy houses, water slides, the reason people are coming there. You're running a church, or is it actually just a daycare? Say your church is up, but your attendance is looking down. Say your family comes from pirates, but you're better suited as a clown. Remember that time in your office when you went on and on all about your daughter's traumas? Told me people used to try to break into your home, but then your daughter said that those were all lies for your little show. Remember in your house when you were sitting in your underwear? You were going on and on about your spiritual warfare. And I asked your daughter if she really thinks it's true, and she told me not to trust a word that ever comes from you. Ain't it funny your own family's against you? They stay silent cause they're scared, but they know the truth. That's why Landon left the church to get a better job. Even Ashley knows your whole church is a flop. Remember that dream Grace was cheating on you? Then you found out it was true, she was getting put by another dude. And so funny that you still stay with her after. Doesn't that hurt your reputation as a pastor? Come on, Mark, stop trying to annoy me. We're servants to God, not your freaking employees. Don't you get tired of all the times you lose? Now you're back to being a scandal in the news. No, I'm not holding back, Mark, you'll never be the winner. Are you just mad your daughter's a bad kisser? You told lies even though you knew the truth. Are you mad it was me that kissed your daughter and that it wasn't you? Alright, sorry not sorry, Mark, but maybe this will shut you up for a little. Well, until next time, peace.